Parenting, the most difficult thing in the world, and at the same time one of the simplest and most intuitive if done right. However, maybe you're struggling with it. I don't know about you, but most of my adult life, whilst I've been doing therapy with other people and me being in therapy, one of the things that has scared me the most was bad parenting. And the reason that I say this is that I've come into contact with incredible diseases. I've come into contact with the deepest emotional dramas of human life. I've seen a lot of suffering and a lot of joy. I've seen people who were at the uppermost edge of society, the very top in the social order, and also some in the very bottom, some of the richest, some of the poorest, some extremely intelligent, some not so. One of the most destructive things that I've ever seen was bad parenting. And now you may be thinking, okay, so bad parenting, what does it entail? You know, I mean, surely we could agree on some things, right? Like, for example, you should do everything for the child because, you know, the children are our most precious things in the world. We would sacrifice everything for our children. The children are our utmost and best, and we want to pour into them everything and anything that can be idealized, right? Basically a kind of a perfectionist approach if you listen to the words that would be spoken out by an avatar speaking out for modern day Western society. Well, I'm here to make some enemies and maybe a few friends as well. I'm unfortunately sure that I'm going to make more enemies than friends with what I'm going to say. But here it is. So, again, this video is not for everyone. This video is not to, make enemies, but I'm sure that I will be stirring a lot of controversies with what I'm going to say. So, what I'm going to tell you in this video are some of the most important repetitive principles that I've seen that underlie good families. And what I mean by good families, I mean families that are successful, families that are balanced, families that are fulfilled, and not just because they say they are fulfilled. My training as a therapist is to put 80% of emphasis not on what people say, but what their bodies say, their body language, and all the indirect signs and symptoms that actually speak to the fact that is truth to their bodies, right? Well, what do I mean by that? It is very easy, and I've encountered this a lot, to see families struggle. I've encountered a lot of parents who had an incredibly difficult life, and when I was confronting them with their problems, many of them were just, insisting on pretending that they're fine, even though all the other things in their lives was showing a very different story. So anyway, my point is, today I'm speaking to those of you who want to become a better parent, or those of you who are struggling with parenting issues and maybe you're interested in hearing a few principles that have been tried and tested, and I've seen them work in practice again and again and again and again. And I think that the number one thing, and this is the one that we're going to be focusing most on, is priorities. And I'm going to say it out loud. The children should not be the priority in the family. Never should the children be the priority. Now, of course, that seems outrageous. What do you mean, Octavian? The children should not be the priority. They're the most important thing. I would kill for my children. Of course you would. What parent would not? Well, there's a reason to why I'm saying this, right? And let's go to a very simple metaphor. When you're flying with an airplane, the message that you hear, which is, very, very well known, is should the oxygen masks fall, you do not put the oxygen mask on the child first. You put the oxygen mask on you first. And that's not because people in aviation have something against children, right? It's not about that. It's about a very pragmatic outlook on how things work. And guess what? The same pragmatic outlook that works in aviation works in everyday life and in families also. I don't know how it is where you live, but at least where I live, and I've worked also with people from a lot of other cultures and a lot of other countries. The emphasis in the previous generation was on pragmatism. The emphasis in previous generations was that, we need to get things done. So basically there were very few resources allotted to the emotional well-being of the child. Emotional intelligence is a very new concept. Caring for the emotional needs of children is something that is much more hyped now than it used to be in, in the 1970s, 80s, right? Or before then. Back then, it was more like, make sure that you have enough money to raise a child, make sure that he or she goes to a good school, make sure that, you have whatever resources you might mean for him to have, but usually those would be more going through the financial part. More recently, as in the last, 20 years, but more recently, like 15 to 10 years, the last 15 to 10 years, there's been more and more emphasis on the emotional well-being, right? It's become part of the general view that children should feel the love and the emotional availability of the parents, right? And that is true. That is so true. But we need to take a little bit of a step back, right? Who are the parents of nowadays? The parents of nowadays are the children of yesterday. And the children of yesterday were very, very deprived of the emotional nourishment that they wanted and needed so desperately. So what's happened is what usually happens in history, right? One extreme is followed by another extreme. And only then usually does it come to a kind of a let's find a middle ground approach, right? So what would be the response to a kind of parenting that is, putting the emotional well-being of a child on a very low priority? Well, the response is, you, meaning my parents, you have no idea how much you've made me suffer, and I'm going to make sure that, I'm going to give my child everything. I'm going to be there for them. I'm going to, really do anything in my power to really give the child everything that I didn't get. Do you know the case where, one of the parents or both of the parents didn't have something and they desperately want the child to have that, regardless of whether the child actually wants that? And this is very much extended into, even professions, right? I always wanted to become a doctor. I didn't become a doctor, so I made sure that my son or my daughter will become a doctor. And therefore I kind of, realize my dreams through my children. I want them to realize what I have not. Now, does that sound familiar? Because if it does, let's play back a little bit. If we have this approach, who is this approach about, right? If I want my children to have something that I didn't have, does anyone stop to ask if the children want that? Does anyone stop to ask if the children need that? Does anyone actually care about the children themselves? Because it seems to me like there's a lot of I and me in this equation, right? Different children have different needs. Different children have different dreams and aspirations. And if it's all about the parents and what they want, it's not so much about the children, isn't it? right? And that's by definition bad parenting. If it's not about the children, then by definition it cannot be good parenting, because parenting should be focused on how to deliver children the best resources available. Now, if it seems a little bit contradictory right now what I'm saying, bear with me a little bit. I'll explain in just a second. But I want to emphasize that there's a historical bias here, right? The parents from today were the children that had their needs neglected yesterday. So obviously they want to compensate, usually overcompensate, right? So we're now extremely emotionally aware of what our children could want to have. Now, this might be a good thing, or so we might be thinking, right? There's no such thing as too much of a good thing. Well, actually there is. And it hits back on that part which I was mentioning. You need to put your oxygen mask first. And I want to use this to come back to what I was saying. You know, it's all about priorities, right? What is your number one priority? In a family, right? Let's say you have 3 choices, right? You, the individual, or either of the 2 parents, right? The 2 parents which made the child, right? The couple as a whole, or the child. Now, most people nowadays usually say their children are the most important thing, right? So they would sacrifice anything and everything for the children. Imagine if we compared the family to a tree, right? And the individuals are the roots, and then the trunk of the tree is the couple, and then the children are like the little branches, the outermost branches reaching towards the sun and bearing fruit, right? You know, putting the foundation of a new generation of trees. Now, which would you say is the most important part of a tree? The roots, the trunk, or the fruits it bears? Now, if you think it's the fruits, you would be dead wrong. Because the idea is, if there are no roots, there's not going to be a tree. If there's not going to be a tree, there's not going to be branches and fruits, right? If there are roots, but there is no trunk, or maybe the trunk is cut in half, yes, there's not going to be, you know, branches and fruits. However, I don't know if you've ever seen trees that have been cut. Some of the trees actually are cut on purpose because they sprout new branches, right? Okay, different geometrically from how it would have been originally, the tree I mean. But still, the tree is not dead. The tree can regenerate if it's cut from the trunk. Some trees at least, right? If you cut the branches, what's going to happen? Other branches will come up, right? Now, I'm not saying, you know, sacrifice the children, to hell with them. No, of course I'm not saying. In an ideal world, we would have infinite resources and there would be enough to go around for everyone. And it would sound, if you want to really get into, you know, the nitty-gritty stuff with me and be, you know, controversial in that, oh, Octavian, you sound so adversarial, so like with a scarcity mentality. Well, guess what? Life is like that because there is a real objective scarcity. And what I mean by that, I don't mean necessarily money, right? Because, you know, maybe some people are so rich that scarcity of money doesn't even matter to them, maybe, right? But I tell you what the scarcity that affects all people is time, right? There are only 24 hours in a day, no matter how much you earn. Whether you're the poorest or the richest person, you still have 24 hours in a day. That's a very limited resource. And in our day and age, it is very, very easy to see how that is very limited because there's a lot of stuff that is pulling at our schedule and our time is very limited, right? So how do you address that? How do you divide your time between your needs as an individual the needs of the couple and the needs of the children. One of the most disastrous diseases that I've seen in society is the wrong prioritization, where a family's needs are prioritized such that the number one priority is the children. What happens when we prioritize the children? Well, when we prioritize, that means the children come first. That means somebody has to come last. And because time is scarce, and because we usually work and we have a busy day, we get to have time with the family at the end of the day. Okay? So there's a limited time that we can have at the end of the day. And by the way, children, they're like these amazing big vacuum cleaners that suck up all the energy and all the time and everything you cannot possibly offer them, right? That's what they do. That's how things are. So basically what happens is that you can only give so much. Right, because there's never going to be a point in a child's life in which he's going to say, well, you know, I don't need your time anymore. I'm fine being with myself. Unless they're older, okay, maybe some exceptions, but usually children want and desire and, you know, pull at you. And so this is not going to be easy, right? You need to be able to draw boundaries. Children need to learn boundaries. Because what happens if you devote all the resources in the world and everything to them, you're going to have fewer resources for the couple, and you're going to have fewer, if any, resources for you as an individual. That's the problem. That's where all goes to hell, because the idea is that, okay, the child may feel satisfied initially, but what happens is that the couple is functioning more in mom and dad mode instead of two lovers. So the first thing that goes away is sex. And then secondly, right, there's an emotional distancing. There's an emotional distancing because, you know, there's one thing to have the closeness of the family, that's one vibe, but there's a whole different vibe when it comes to the closeness of two individuals which come together as man and woman, right? That's a different chemistry, that's a whole different dynamic, very, very, very different. And by the way, the parents' dynamic is by its very own energy non-sexual, right? Because when you're in parent mode, you don't relate sexually to your child, right? That's the very definition of anti-sexual. You do not activate sexual areas in your brain when you're in parent mode. That's the problem, and this is one of the problems, because especially in some couples, one or both of the parents have triggered some emotional traumas from their past, from their experiences as children, and they remain in parent mode. They remain trapped in a certain kind of energy that sucks them in and never allows them to come out back into adult mode, back into man and woman mode, and that's where things really go bust when it comes to the couple. But even so, let's assume that somehow you find a little bit of time and you do connect, right? But you don't have enough time for you as an individual. What's going to happen? If you don't have enough time for you as an individual, you're going to get increasingly distanced from your own soul, from your own needs, from your own development, from your own potential. Because we as individuals have very, very distinct and separate needs, and we need to keep them in focus. It's like a plant that needs to be watered. It's a regular thing. If you don't water the plant of your soul, what's going to happen is what happens to any plant. It's going to shrivel and die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but slowly it will wither and die. And if you are going to become so unavailable emotionally because there's a deep frustration and there's a deep lack of fulfillment that is gnawing at your soul, Do you think you're going to have the emotional availability to give yourself fully to your partner? Do you think you're going to be able to focus on love and sex and intimacy and sharing happy moments when you as an individual are deeply unsatisfied and maybe depressed and maybe anxious and maybe, you know, there's a gaping hole in your soul because you're not actually addressing some of your most individual needs? Our individual needs do not just, you know, pack up and go when we start being in a couple, and certainly they don't pack up and go when children come. Actually, in fact, the exact opposite is true. When children arrive, they suck all life and energy out of us. It's true they generate a lot of, you know, satisfaction also, but they do generate a lot of need for resources, because they do have this as an existential need, right? They literally suck energy out of you, and so they should, because you're there to provide for them. But how can you provide for them if your plate is empty? How can you share what you have on your plate with someone else? You can't bring something to the table when your plate is empty. It doesn't happen in relationships. It doesn't happen in the intimacy of the couple, because you can't make someone happy and you can't bring something to the couple when you are empty. And I've said this in other videos as well. The mathematics, the arithmetics of love are not those touted in the Occidental, the Western part of the world, right? Where we are conditioned from a very young age to believe that, you know, half a heart and another half of heart, they make a heart together, right? I've found my other half, or how others want to put it, I've found my better half. Oh, come on. Yeah, no. The arithmetic of love is not addition. A half and a half don't make a whole. The arithmetic of love is multiplication. Half and half, they multiply and they make a quarter. If you have problems and your partner has problems, you're going to have more problems together, right? And it's not going to feel like you have a lot more resources. It's going to feel like you have a lot more problems, emotionally speaking. Okay? So you need to be okay as a couple, but in order to be okay as a couple, you need to be okay as individuals. If you're not okay as individuals, the couple eventually will distance themselves one from the other. Guess what happens to the children once that happens? When the couple is developing fissures, and you know, there are little cracks and little fissures, and there's this sense of instability, there's this sense of distancing, there's this sense of, hey, you know, it's not like it used to be once. Subconsciously, the children feel it. They feel it very, very well. And what happens when the children feel this insecurity is they become even more demanding, because they feel insecure, they feel unstable in the couple, because the environment, the vibe that is sent out from the dynamic of the couple is very clearly felt by children, subconsciously, of course. So even if they don't understand rationally what's going on, subconsciously they feel it very well. So what's going on is that they are going to be more demanding, because they are trying to manage their insecurities by gripping the parents even tighter, right? Because they want to feel secure again. And that, of course, puts a lot of pressure on the parents and on the couple, and these are going to distance themselves even more from one another, and they're going to fight even more, and that's going to make the children feel even less secure, and that's going to... you see the downward spiral? That's what's going to happen. And unfortunately, this is something that can be prevented, usually is not prevented, and I've seen so many families go down because they've literally ruined every and any positive dynamic in the couple. And I could go on, right? Because it so multiplies in so many directions. Like, for example, when couples stay together for the sake of the children, oh my God, don't even get me started on that. When they stay together for the sake of the children, what happens is that they sacrifice themselves. They're not happy, they're not somewhere where they want to be, but they think, oh my God, the children want us and need us to stay together. No, they don't need you to stay together. They need to feel secure. They need to feel that you want to be together. They need the stability of a home. Literally living together whilst fighting is the very antithesis of stability, right? Now, of course, any child would wish for the parents to, get along and be together. Well, guess what? In real life, sometimes that's not possible, right? Sometimes the hard truth is that some people are just not meant to be together in a relationship, but too late, they've created some children, and now they have children, but they shouldn't be together because they're not compatible, they don't get along, they make themselves, they make each other miserable, right? And that's to raise a child or many children in such an atmosphere, in such a vibe, is simply going to immerse them in this vibe and subconsciously communicate to them that that's what a family looks like. That's what couples look like, right? And guess what? Every day I treat people who've been raised in this dynamic, and they, now as adults, have suffered because their parents have stayed together even though they shouldn't have stayed together because they didn't get along, and had the children not actually been, they would have split a long time ago, but they didn't. They stayed together for the couple. And why do these children as adults come to therapy? Because of their own problematic relationships. And why do they get into these problematic relationships? Because subconsciously they've been conditioned to see that this is what a couple looks like. It's familiar, right? Unhappiness and familiarity. What do we choose? What is our most basic need? Familiarity wins every time. We are driven towards what is familiar and therefore seems secure any day of the week. We would choose that any day of the week over happiness, right? Happiness that is foreign, that is unknown, is felt as it's insecure, unreliable. No, I'm going to go to my ordinary suffering, which I know very well. And that just sucks, isn't it? So, to wrap up, guys, the reason why some of us are having difficulty to actually stomach all of this that I've been saying, even though it's very, very real and very, very logical, is because we see this, everything that I've discussed so far in this video has a very, very big, deep emotional charge. And it's impossible to see this without the emotional lenses that we've acquired through our own childhoods. Luckily, we have tools. Luckily, we can actually develop the necessary harmony, internal emotional balance through things like, for example, emotional acupuncture or karmic acupuncture. How does that work? Well, I have whole videos on that. I'm not going to go into that. But just to wrap it up, it works by healing our wounds so that we don't pass them on. We want to not pass them on, but sometimes by overcompensating, we actually create a different wound. True enough, not necessarily the one we had, but a different wound, just as bad or sometimes even worse than the one that we had, right? So, to be able to be a parent, you need to be a good individual, and a good individual is a healed individual. So good parenting starts with one thing, and that one thing is you, right? And I'm not saying, this is almost a cliche, it starts with you, but it does start with you. It starts with you putting yourself first. It starts with understanding that if you don't put yourself first, all your limitations, all your wounds are going to be passed and amplified by the couple and as a parent. So if you want what is best for your child, the best thing that you can do for your child is you go to therapy, you solve your own shit, and once you become a much more harmonious person, your child will benefit 1,000 times more. That is the spirit of good parenting. You put yourself first, and by example, you will be teaching how your child should be putting himself first, and everybody wins like that. Because if your plate is full, you're going to have something to bring to the couple. And if the couple is harmonious, then they're naturally going to come together and have the emotional resources so that the child feels enough. I'll see you in the next video. By the way, if you like these videos, don't forget to click subscribe, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode. Hope you enjoyed it.